PlexTrack is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. PlexTrack is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrack to claim your free month. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Our next live webcast will be held on March 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You're going to learn how to prepare Linux host for unexpected threats. It's going to be a lot of good Linux nerdy stuff happening on that webcast. You can register at securityweekly.com/webcast. You can check out the entire archive of our previously recorded webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Mr. Lee Neely is here with me for this pre-recorded segment. Lee, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here. Looking forward to seeing what our guest has got to tell us about ransomware.
Absolutely. Love digging into the security researchers in our wonderful community. Assaf Dahan, is that right? I think the teleprompter's wrong.
Assaf Dahan.
Assaf Dahan. Sorry, my teleprompter was misspelled. Assaf Dahan is here with us. He's the Senior Director and Head of Threat Research at Cybereason and has over 15 years experience in the InfoSec industry. He started his career in the Israeli military 8200 cybersecurity unit. I've heard of that before, where he gained extensive experience in offensive security. Assaf, it's nice to have you here on the show today. I apologize for butchering your name at the beginning.
No worries. I'm used to it.
It's a trip, man, when like your brain wants to do one thing, but your teleprompter is even slightly off. Like it just like core dumps me every time. So Assaf, good to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
So Assaf, I guess start off by telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to be at Cybereason Research Labs and what some of the goals and missions are of the labs.
For sure. Well, as you mentioned, I started my career back when I was 18. So I spent my entire adult life working on, in the field of cybersecurity, even before it was actually called cyber. So I started my career at the 8200 unit. It's like the Israeli intelligence, military intelligence. And after almost 4 years there, I became a civilian and worked in different companies under different roles or hats. Started my way from application security, working for Imperva. Mm-hmm. Probably heard of this company.
Imperva's a sponsor.
Then I kind of switched to red teaming, penetration testing, then discovered the world of, or rediscovered the world of malware analysis and threat intelligence and fell in love with it again. And that led me to Cybereason. I've been with the company for 5 years now. I started at the R&D in Israel, then relocated to Japan. I was there for almost 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in London managing, back then I was managing our threat hunting practice, and now I'm managing the threat research practice.
Gotcha.
The Nocturnus.
Yeah. Assaf, what are some of the kind of goals and missions of the Cybereason's threat research team?
So it's a multidisciplinary team of different researchers coming from different backgrounds, also different locations. So you have people specializing in malware analysis, reverse engineering, forensics, threat hunting, and so and OSINT, of course. And I guess the main goal is to track and monitor the threat landscape. About 70% of our work is dedicated to cybercrime, be it banking Trojan, ransomware, different types of frauds that we're seeing, and generally cybercrime. It could be different threat actors that their main purpose is monetary gain, financial gain. 30% of our work, around 30%, is dedicated to tracking down nation-state APTs or threat actors. And I think being an endpoint company, we get to see like really cool stuff. I mean, we have endpoints deployed all the way from Japan to Brazil. So we get to see very interesting attacks across multiple regions, multiple industries. So it's a lot of fun. It keeps us busy.
Yeah. And you certainly, yourself and your team have been on a tear on ransomware, which is awesome. I guess my first question is, how often do you see ransomware being a vehicle to generate revenue for the threat actors versus being part of some other attack? I mean, glaring example, NotPetya. Obviously, they weren't interested in collecting the ransom. My theory is they were covering their tracks for something that we may never know about, but I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Well, I think that, first of all, it's a great question, and sometimes the line do get blurry there. But I think for, let's say, over 90%, even more of the times that we're seeing ransomware attacks, it's for financial gain. There are cases where ransomware or even wipers are being used to really cover up operations, or using it as a decoy. So to get rid of forensic artifacts. So we've seen that with NotPetya. We've seen it. The North Koreans use it. We've seen the Russians do it. Like different groups around the world. So yeah, and also I actually seen cyber criminals. Also, there were several instances where we've seen threat actors operating for months, sometimes stealing data, stealing all sorts of things. And then at the very end, they released a ransomware or a wiper, also for, to claim, the ransom fee, but also to cover up the previous acts. But I think we take at Cybereason, and I personally take ransomware very seriously. I think today it's the number one threat that is menacing, the world, basically. I mean, it could be individuals, like, let's say, my grandmother, and it could be major companies. So, and we see that, like, day after day, there are like news about, big corporations worldwide getting hit and actually paralyzed by ransomware. And I think this is one of the most troubling trends that we're seeing, and I can talk about later why and how it became such a significant threat. And
yeah, I think Assaf, what intrigues me is the double, and in your description just now, almost triple extortion that happens. Because first, like you were saying, if an attacker is inside of, let's just say, a large or medium-sized corporate network, there are artifacts there that they could steal that they could probably turn around and sell on the dark web. And so that has monetary value. Then they now have a copy of that sensitive information. They can use that as extortion to say, hey, like, I have this, you need to pay me, and I'll give it back to you or I won't sell it. Although, how much do you trust a criminal? And then, like, the third component is there's ransomware. So, like, I'm gonna not only just sell your stuff, I'm gonna ransomware you and collect the ransom from that, right? So there's like multiple ways that they can criminals are monetizing this. Do you see this kind of playing out in that way?
For sure, and this is a very troubling trend that we've been observing, because up until, let's say, 2018, 2019, actually, most ransomware attacks were targeting, or were still, I guess the majority were still targeting individuals. That we've seen attacks on companies, but it was more of a type of like a spray and pray type of attacks. It wasn't too much premeditated, or it was quite opportunistic. And then I think ransomware operators realized the business model, like this very successful business model of attacking organizations. So you have higher, they can demand higher ransom fees, and we can see higher payouts. I think the average payout is over $100 100K US dollars, and but some ransomware attacks are even like 20 million or 30 million. It really depends on the company. But what I'm trying to say here is that this is one of the shifts, I guess, that we've seen with regards to ransomware operators, like switching from attacking individuals to really focusing on corporations and enterprises and even small, medium businesses, but basically on businesses that knowing that they will probably pay. Now, another shift that we've seen starting in 2019, but it really picked up during 2020, post-COVID, I guess. And I guess I'm not even sure if we reached the pinnacle of it, or there's still more to go. But basically, the business model worked, up to a certain point, because you had businesses that could say, "Hey, okay, we'll pay," and some businesses chose not to pay because of different restrictions, or maybe they didn't have the money, or maybe they just had really good disaster recovery plans and backup, so they didn't need to. They could restore their own data without paying the ransom fee. So ransomware operators devised this genius plan, and I'm saying it with no. I'm really serious. It's quite smart. Of twisting the victim's arm into payment. So they're saying, okay, if you're not going, whether you can restore your own data or not, that's one thing. But now ransomware operators, what they do, they steal data, they exfiltrate insane amount of data, gigabytes and gigabytes from the victims. This could include customer information, PII, other sensitive information, intellectual property. So this becomes not only about whether I can restore the data and a question of business continuity. All of a sudden, it becomes, it opens up legal liabilities. It opens up, there's a reputational damage there. Because now what the ransomware operators are doing, once they steal the data, they threaten to either publish it or sell it to the highest bidder. Mm-hmm. So again, now if you got hacked by a ransomware group, and they stole a lot of data, not paying becomes less. It becomes less of a viable option, I guess. It becomes very scary not to pay. Yeah. And there's another.
Well, what if there are in that data other crimes that company does not want to?
Of course, I mean, dirty laundry, a lot of things. Yeah. I don't know, tax evasion. Who knows?
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of things could be in there. Yeah.
And what we're actually seeing is like even like a third or fourth degree like attempts to put on pressure on victims to pay. They use GDPR and other regulatory regulations against the victims. They say, hey, if you're not going to pay, we're going to actually rat on you to GDPR or other agencies, so exploiting regulatory fines or the fear of regulatory fines against the victims. So it's really interesting. And just recently, the operators of Revel, it's one of the biggest and most notorious, one of the most notorious ransomware cartels operating at the moment. So they actually said that they're going to start calling journalists and and customers and other people, again, to apply pressure on the victims, really twist our arm into payment.
Right. Sorry, Lee, did you have some questions?
Yeah. So one of the things that strikes me with the extortion route is that I'm having a hard time buying that they don't still have your data and can use it again in the future. I mean,
there's no guarantee. I mean, you have their word.
As much as that means from a criminal.
Right. Yeah, of course. Like the word is their bond, I guess. I mean, I guess to some extent, and I don't know about like what they do if they really delete the data or not, but at least if you look at the decryptors, so there is if you pay, there's like a 95 decryption rate, which is good. I mean, like, so there are like, if you pay, you'll actually get your data back most of the time, at least from what we've seen. Whether they're like resell it after you paid, whether they delete the data, my guess is as good as anyone, but there's definitely no guarantee that they won't come back and make similar demands in a few months or a year's time.
We were talking about they're focusing on smaller businesses, the mom and pop shop, as it were. Do you have any sense on whether they're better able to pay? I could see how they'd be more willing to pay because they don't have somebody with their back from a cybersecurity perspective, but do you have any sense if that's real, or is it just hit or miss?
I think, from what we're seeing, there's what we call big game hunting. That's like it goes back to the second shift that we've been seeing, like really targeting like the like large companies, but also small to medium businesses are a good target because usually they'll have they're not going to have like a great security posture most of the time. They're not going to have like a SOC or like at best they'll have like an IT or a small security team. And usually when they see it, it's already too late. I think, and that's a problem. Ransomware attacks are getting very, very aggressive. I think if in the past we were observing, let's say 3 to 4 weeks dwell time on average. So like from the minute they infiltrated the environment, they achieve persistence, work their way, laterally, and compromise like major assets. So usually the whole process would take like 3 to 4 weeks. Now, they got really greedy, so they want, to compromise as many environments as they can. So we're seeing, first of all, we're seeing that they're actively recruiting hackers on the dark net. And second of all, we see the dwell time drastically dropping to even a few hours. I think the fastest I've heard was the Ryuk ransomware that made it like from initial compromise to distributed ransomware infection in 1 hour. There've been a report. The fastest I've seen with my own eyes is around like 6-7 hours. So that doesn't give a lot of time for the defenders to really defend. If in the past we had like the luxury of, there's 3 to 4 weeks, we can still catch them. Now it's dropped to a few hours until.
I had this vision that the longer model they were being fairly quiet and under the radar and hard to detect. I mean, this feels like they've gone to a smash and grab, which is going to be noisy. Is it making it any easier to detect it, or it's just too fast for people to respond to?
Well, I guess it's a good question. It really depends on your security posture, how well trained your staff is, what's your visibility, what capabilities of detection and prevention are put in place, if you have a good threat hunting practice. And I guess most small to medium businesses don't have the same security posture or the expertise that larger enterprises have. And yet, even with that, large enterprises are still getting pawned and compromised every day. So I think one of the most important thing to do is understand the initial infection vector, and I can talk about it. It's not very creative. It's something that repeats itself most of the time. So if you know how to detect and prevent those initial attempts, you're more likely to succeed in stopping a ransomware attack from being successful. Of course, easier said than done, but I think now it's all about nipping it in the bud rather than trying to catch it later. And if we want to talk about those infection vectors that we're seeing, the most common ones. So the first one is unpatched or misconfigured assets. It could be like a vulnerable web server. If anyone heard of Hafnium, that's like a good time to patch your mail exchange server. But like it could be any type of server that is either not patched or misconfigured. It sounds like like a very basic thing, of course. So most people say, yeah, why would a server won't be patched, right? But the fact is that we're still seeing it I see it on a daily basis. Just I think a week or two ago, we triaged an incident, and we were able to trace it back to a web server that wasn't updated for 5 years. Now, I know that patch management is hard. It's easier said than done, especially if you have an environment of thousands of assets and thousands of endpoints, but it's still, I think it's no excuse. I think there should be, especially if it's a production server, there should be a lot of I guess processes to make sure that systems are patched and updated and well configured. There are tons of materials out there on how to harden your system, and I think
Assaf, one of the things that we're doing in the labs component that we haven't actually officially announced, so I have to be careful about how much I do say about it, but we're reviewing attack surface monitoring solutions, both commercial and open source. Usually that's a case where the company didn't know they had that web server hanging out there. They would have patched it had they known about it. And what I like about attack surface monitoring is that it can tell you, and having been hands-on with some of these products, I'm like, oh, if I had any one of these products, like they're actually all really good, I would know about that. I know that because I've run them against our environment, here at Security Weekly and CRA. And
I hear you.
That would...
The amount of time I had to speak to a CISO or an IT manager and tell them, well, the attack came from that server, then they moved laterally to that server, and they're like, oh, I didn't know this server existed. So like it happens more times than you think. Right. So definitely, I guess, know thyself or know thy environment. That's also a good principle to have. So so the first infection vectors that we're seeing is those misconfigured or unpatched assets.
I just want to talk about the ransom and pivot a little bit, because I'm curious to get your perspective, because I know in the U.S. we've talked about regulations and or guidance to organizations that advise them not to pay the ransom. That's a slippery slope. I can imagine when you put that in the context of Israel, if you had even some inclination that paying the ransom was going to fund someone in Iran, I can see that being a huge issue. So I'm curious if you have any insights as to how other countries outside the U.S. are handling those ransomware payments.
I'm afraid that it's a very gray area, and I think one of the reasons is that there are many businesses or victims of ransomware attacks that will choose not to disclose what actually went on there with the negotiation. They'll say that they didn't succumb to different threats and so on, but in reality, they did, or to some extent. It's a very gray area. It involves ethics and in some places even laws that are against cooperating with the terror entities or organized crime. It really varies between each country, but I think from what I'm seeing, there are most victims that. Especially with most victims of double extortion, from what I've seen, they paid, even if they said that they didn't. From what I've personally seen, they're paying it.
Right. Because it's easier than robbing a bank in that respect. The North Koreans, right, famously had the hack where they stole money from a bank. I mean, obviously that's going to be investigated. That's a crime. That's high profile. What you just said, Assaf, is very interesting. Is that as an attacker, if I commit ransomware, that company's not going to want to talk about it. And I'm going to get the funds. And if that's funding a nation state somewhere, now we're all kind of like under the covers rather than the high profile example of North Korea hacking a bank.
Yeah. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So if you still want to hear more about the infection vectors,
I do.
I think
we can switch back to that. Sure.
It's super important because I'm speaking from experience that I think that if we can educate or just like bring awareness to how ransomware operators are succeeding and probably where we should stop them is something that can be beneficial for a lot of people. So the second infection vector that we see very commonly is with compromised accounts, and there's a flourishing RDP laundering and other credential market on the darknet and other underground communities. So basically, today, if I wanted to get like an RDP session or like credentials of an employee at company X, for that matter, it would cost me anywhere between $10 to $800. It really depends on the region and the company. So that gives you already like a door. A foot in the door.
Now, Assaf, how much does two-factor authentication, even something as simple as SMS, help prevent that initial attack vector you just described?
Oh yeah, I definitely think that MFA, 2FA really helps with reducing the attack surface. So yeah, especially on high privileged accounts, it's something that it should be like the golden standard. I mean, that's a recommendation anyway. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not implemented, not enough. And for in some cases, I can understand how it can affect like the business or the business flow. But I guess at least when it comes to high privilege accounts, it should be the golden standard using two-factor or multi-factor authentication process.
Yeah, agreed. But and it has to be fully implemented and it has to stay implemented. That's what I've often experienced is it sounds great and you roll it out and then a couple of weeks later you start making exceptions. And it's the exceptions that can get you in trouble.
Yeah. Well, you also mentioned that people are still getting captured credentials. I forget the right term for it. Are folks not detecting that they've had their credentials stolen and changing them? I have a feeling that's the case.
So most people, I mean, if the let's say if the malware or the hacker that compromised the attack was any good, so most people would not even know about it. Unless there is an let's say security product alert on it, and if it was remediated or investigated later, most people would not know about it. And there are thousands, not thousands, even millions of credentials that are out there that have been leaked also from different databases. And so we're seeing all of that. And thirdly, the third infection vector that we're seeing, and that's actually one of the most common ones, is through social engineering, just like downright social engineering, phishing email. But here it gets interesting because we see the collaboration and actually the ecosystem of organized crime. We see what we're actually looking into today is understanding the infection chain that eventually leads from a commodity malware, let's say an information stealer or a banking Trojan or some sort of a downloader, and how it eventually leads to a ransomware deployment. And it's a very interesting chain of infection. And nowadays, at least my team and at Cybereason, we're looking at those commodity malware, at certain commodity malware, as precursors or like a warning signs for a potential ransomware attack. Because I guess the typical flow of the attack is, let's say somebody opened a phishing email. They, let's say, with a document, it downloaded or dropped A commodity malware could be a banking Trojan, information stealer. So this information stealer or whatever commodity malware is collecting a lot of information about the host, sometimes about the domain, really trying to assess where it landed. Because again, it's not super targeted in most cases. And then all of this information about the host and the the neighboring computers are uploaded to the command and control server, and then and up until then it's pretty automatic, like no hands or no fingers involved there so much. But then the let's say the malware operators, they can assess whether they landed on a high profile environment or whether they landed on an individual computer versus a company computer that is part of let's say a domain. And based on that information, they'll choose whether they want to escalate the attack themselves and get to what we call hands-on keyboard type of attack, or maybe they want to kind of like turn it over to a business affiliate, if you will, like a partner, which will be one of the, let's say, ransomware groups. So we see that interesting flow. So nowadays, we really try to pay attention to all of those commodity malware that we're I guess most SOC analysts are quite fatigued. So they don't really pay attention to them so much, or they don't think that if I'm not going to respond to it really fast in a few hours' time, my entire environment might be ransomed. So it's something that should really, it's something that I want to bring to the general public or community awareness.
So when you first started, I was thinking you were detecting that if this particular malware dropped, then it might be followed by a given ransomware, but you went to a different spot than I was expecting. So the idea that they find a low-value target and then send the exploit over to a buddy of theirs who'll be happy to pillage it while they continue looking for the big fish is a interesting model.
It's basically they'll try to milk whatever they can from that cow. So let's say if they landed on an individual machine, so yeah, they'll just steal data, some passwords, maybe financial information, and that's it. Move on to the next victim. But if they landed on a company that it's in on their list of potential high profile targets, so they'll definitely try to escalate the attack. And that's another detection opportunity, because the first detection opportunity is actually detecting and preventing commodity malware. The second detection opportunity before it gets to ransomware is understanding what happens during that hands-on keyboard phase, which can take anywhere from, as I said, 1 hour to a few weeks. Really, it really depends on the level of aggressiveness and expertise and prowess of the attackers. But usually, in most cases, I have to say, it's not super creative. It's almost like penetration testing 101. They'll try, they'll use a Cobalt Strike and Metasploit and Bloodhound and different tools that are used by red teams and penetration testers worldwide. Mimikatz for credential dumping. Different, of course, using different commands of PowerShell, WMI. It's all things that are not super novel. So I think that if you have the right, first of all, right visibility into your environment, it starts with that. So have a good visibility and then build detection logic, whether you use some sort of a security product or you use your own custom detection and prevention, that's fine. But just you have to know the TTPs. You need to know the modus operandi. You need to understand what is a precursor of such an attack, how it looks like.
Assaf, in your analysis of the ransomware in what you're describing now, does Mitre attack cover most of it that you see in most ransomware? In other words, it sounds like that's what you're
Mitre is a great framework, and I definitely urge security practitioners to make sure that they get as much coverage from those techniques. Of course, you can't get like 100% coverage.
And even if you do, I mean, there's still going to be techniques that aren't. But what you're saying is a great starting point for most ransomware. Most of those attacks are, covered in Mitre attack. Is what I've found in, talking with folks.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I got the sense that you're saying that where people are detecting, they're not necessarily looking for the right stuff, or am I going too far?
No, you're absolutely right about it. I've had the dubious pleasure of looking at helping either at Cybereason or even like friends from the industry, where you kind of trace back a ransomware attack, and you see that it actually started with commodity malware. But the commodity malware was not triaged properly, or maybe it. An analyst took maybe too much time to get to it, because I have been a SOC analyst years ago, so I know all about alert fatigue and like how SOC analysts treat the queue and everything. But there are some things that should pop out, I think, and it's all about I guess education and awareness, bringing awareness. Because let's say if TrickBot, for instance, now they're pretty much gone, but like almost. But if TrickBot, which is or Mitre back then, it's a commodity malware. Both that you see a dime a dozen a day, right? You see sometimes even dozens a day, depending on the environment, and not every single infection. Is escalated eventually to a fully fledged ransomware attack, right? So, but you still need to treat it as if it might be escalated. That's right. I think that's the point.
So you mentioned a couple of the ransomware operators that have shut down. Is the shutting down really making a difference on the landscape, or is it just where one goes away, a bunch more will step in their place?
That's a good question. So I guess all of the above is correct to a certain extent. From what I've been able to gather so far is that some groups they will declare their early retirement, and then in a few months' time, a new group will pop, and miraculously they will be very they'll have very similar code, or they'll have very similar modus operandi to the group that allegedly was retired. So there's that. Just like I guess like rebranding, you can call it maybe like a market or ransomware marketing stunt.
Love it,
perhaps. So there's that. But yeah, but some ransomware operators really they made their fortune. Sometimes it's not that small. It could amount to millions and millions of dollars. And they said, "Hey, I'm good for life, for a lifetime. So I don't need to work anymore." It's a very lucrative and very like the business model of ransomware operators is very lucrative, and it's very it pays well if you know what you're doing. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I could see that. Go ahead, Paul.
I wanted to talk about the social engineering aspect and how common that is. It can be so hard to defend yourself against that attack, especially when you're working for a business. I got a phone call from someone yesterday, and man, the split-second decisions you have to make when you're on the receiving end of that call. And the caller was like, well, who am I talking to? I'm like, well, you called me. Like, that was an easy one. I'm like, oh, you called me. And they're like, oh, I'm looking for this specific person. And I was like, all right, don't, like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, don't give away any information that's not already public, right? And then I'm like, oh, well, I talked to that person over Slack. And I'm like, like, I just leaked some technology that we use. I'm like, that was bad. And like, even me, I've interviewed social engineers, studied the field. I've done social engineering engagements before. And even I make mistakes. And when I go back and I review the tape, as it were, in my head, I'm like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that, right? Is that common in ransomware?
Yeah, it's very common. There are a bunch of ransomware strains that their main infection vector is based on based off social engineering. Usually it's like an email with some sort of a document, an office document most of the time, but it could be other type of attachments. So we see it very often. And unfortunately, social engineering is not novel at all. It's not new.
It's not new.
It's been there since forever, but it's very effective. And the reason why it's so effective is because we human, mere mortals, are the weakest link in the cybersecurity, chain, I guess. So it's easier to trick a human than tricking a really good detection engine these days. So I guess email filters and like having an endpoint, a good endpoint solution, can really reduce. But at the end of the day, it has to be also part of there should be social engineering training and awareness. And even with that, people will still open. You just need one person to do it.
They were like asking me for someone's phone number, and I'm like, I don't have it. Like, I talk with them on Slack, and like that was like my best like defense. But even that was a pretty crappy defense when I went back and thought about it. Right?
For sure.
I've taken to saying no. I'm not going to give you a free contact.
Yeah.
For marketing, as like
right.
No.
But you don't know. I'm like, but then I think that one of the reasons people fall victim even to email is like, what if that really was a client, a sponsor that really was trying to get in touch with someone or whatever the ruse is? You're like, wait, I don't want to be rude to a sponsor. So I think human nature, especially if it could be a customer, is like, well, don't be rude or difficult with that person. But at the same time, you have to keep your guard up, both in email, phone call, text, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's the fine line between being polite and also service oriented to knowing how to guard the perimeter. Yeah, so
layer 8 is the most fun and the most challenging.
Sure.
The humans. I used to say, get rid of the humans. I say, hell no, we need them. It makes our jobs wonderful, and they are so frustrating.
Any other things that you're researching?
Oh, at any given moment, my research queue is pretty stacked. Because I told you we were looking at, of course, ransomware takes a big part of my team's work. We publish quite a lot of ransomware research blogs on the Cybereason research blog, especially around detection and prevention. I mean, our technology, sorry for the commercial I'm doing here, but we have a really good anti-ransomware prevention capabilities. So it's fun to showcase it with the blog. But other than that, we're looking at different cyber crime groups. We're looking at the new commodity malware that are out there. We're looking at financial organized crime, targeting mostly financial institutions in North America and West Europe. And of course, there's also always the cream of the crop, which is we're tracking down different nation-state threat actors from the East and also from Europe.
Yeah, there's no shortage. It's interesting. I was listening to an interview with someone that did a documentary film on the Silk Road. And one thing that I thought was interesting that really transfers, I think, into folks in our field and why we need more folks in our field is they're like, DEA agents used to, break down doors and do raids with, live weapons and talk about what weapons they had and stuff like that. Now they're like, how much RAM's in your computer? I was like, well, that's really telling to what we do, right? Because the crimes you're talking about investigating today, years ago were physical law enforcement people. Now it's folks like us, both in law enforcement and outside of law enforcement, doing those investigations in some capacity.
For sure.
Because it's all digital now.
And you see it also with cyber warfare. I mean, if back in the day you would launch a missile or send tanks, and nowadays you can just send a malware, develop malware and deliver it, and it will do the job pretty well. And also, it's harder to attribute it to a country. like the topic of attribution, I think we can talk about it like for
we could do a whole other
hour.
segment. Oh my God,
Yeah.
it's amazing because as you know, Assaf, there's so many different phases of an attack in different attack groups. They are responsible for small. We talked about ransomware and how they would go in and steal data. Well, I mean, they could sell that data. They could sell the access to that. And we talked, touched on some of those different aspects. And then, like, for me, my biggest issue with attribution is we tend to point the finger and go, this attack was that nation state. But, like, which phase? Because likely there's a lot of threat actors involved in all the different stages of that attack, as you very well know. I mean, this is your daily
There
work.
are different activity groups and clusters that we're looking at it. And I think one of the things that actually is more challenging nowadays is that I think most, let's say government or with nefarious intentions, they like to use cyber mercenaries and the subcontractors to carry out the dirty work. So the line between state ordered to state executed or state sponsored is becoming much more blurry.
And Assaf, do you also feel that the mercenaries have different skill sets, and that's why when we analyze an attack, we're like, whoa, that's kind of like, I mean, forgive the term, that's kind of noobish, but that's like really, really advanced. And we see those different levels of sophistication in any given attack?
Well, first of all, yeah, that could be the reason. I mean, like if you have different people working on an operation, so yeah, you'll see like that the level varies. But we also need to be very mindful of psychological warfare and planting, let's say, false flags. So sometimes they wouldn't want to appear too sophisticated, so they don't really reveal their trade craft. That could be one reason. And another reason is that what was my second point? I had a second point. It'll come back to me maybe later.
That's all right. Yeah, no, I think there was. Go ahead, Lee.
You were also making the point that, the last step is somebody throwing the incendiary device to wipe out all traces who was there, which could really mess up that attribution if you didn't catch them earlier. So I like the idea it's an incendiary device dropping the ransomware, but that might be a little too severe for some people.
Yeah, certainly a lot of nested stories, and we'd love to have you back, Assaf, talk about that stuff.
Glad to be here.
Assaf, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. I do want to drive people to and encourage folks to go read the Cybereason blog. You can go to cybereason.com. Go to the blog. There's a research section that has a lot of really great articles from Assaf's team. So, Assaf, thank you very much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. You have a good one.